Hello, boys and girls. Welcome to a great day of learning. We will be your teachers today. I'm Miss Ashley.
And I'm Miss Tara. We are so glad to be with you today for tons of fun reading and knowledge. For our lesson today, you will need some paper and a pencil, some crayons or markers.
We have some learning goals today. We will compare and contrast ways of life today and early American farm life. And we will even discuss your personal responses on having chores at home, shopping for clothes and food, and connect those to the chores and shops in colonial times. Our focus standards today are RL.K.9, W.K.8, and L.K.4.
Today's read aloud is Colonial Towns and Townspeople, and it takes place in the 1700s. We would like to share with you some interesting history before we read the story to you.
Right. Let's travel back in time for a few minutes. Native Americans lived in America for hundreds of years. Many tribes were nomadic, meaning that they moved frequently, finding new hunting grounds, looking for new sources of fish and vegetation, and moving when the seasons changed. Other tribes settled in one location, developing large farming communities and became large towns over time. When European explorers like Christopher Columbus came, they set up settlements in which they stayed each time they came to claim lands and goods on their voyages. But many of these settlements were temporary and didn't last.
Years later, other groups of Europeans sailed to America to stay and live here permanently. One such group was the Pilgrims. Groups like the Pilgrims set up colonies or towns in America that were ruled by England. Native Americans continued to live in America on lands near those colonies, but they didn't live in the same kinds of towns that European Americans did. The first towns established by European settlers were small, with a few common buildings and land to grow crops.
As the years passed, more colonies were established along the east coast of America. The farms and the towns grew larger, and the people who lived there grew to depend more on each other for the things that they needed. The colonial towns we will read about were formed in the early 1700s when these colonies were still under English rule. Today, we want you to listen carefully to the read aloud so you'll be able to name the chores that the children had to do long ago in colonial times if they lived on a farm.
That's our purpose for reading today. Before we go into our read aloud, let's learn some important vocabulary words.
Remember, these vocabulary words help us to learn new things. When we get to the read aloud, because we have learned these words already, you'll be able to understand or comprehend what we're reading. What a great thing.
I'm telling you, Miss Ashley, vocabulary is one of my favorite parts of reading. How about let's play a game while we learn these new vocabulary words?
I think that's a great idea. What do you have in mind?
Let's play Learn It, Draw It. We'll learn the new word, then we'll draw a quick picture about it to help us remember it. Friends, grab your paper and pencils and learn and draw with us.
Okay, let's play it. Our first word is trade. I see that word here on our chart. So I'll work on drawing while Miss Tara teaches that word.
Scholars. The word trade is a noun. It is a job that uses special skills, knowledge, and tools. For example, my brother worked as an apprentice to learn the trade of blacksmithing.
Okay, I have the picture ready.
Great addition to our definition, Miss Ashley. Now, our next word goes along with trade is a tradesperson. Now, Miss Ashley, you tell us all about the word while I draw a picture.
A tradesperson is a person who works in a job that requires special skills, knowledge, and tools. My aunt is a tradesperson because she works as a carpenter, building houses out of wood.
Miss Ashley, I was drawing a house to show a carpenter as a tradesperson. I'll add your ant to my drawing.
Great plan. We could also take that word tradesperson and modify it to tradespeople to show more than one person. Now, what was our first word that we learned a few minutes ago? There you go, trade. What is the word about a person who works in a job that requires a special skill? Ah, yes, trade person.
I'll put the picture of Miss Ashlee's aunt up. She's a trades person who builds houses.
Friends, how are your drawings going? We knew you could do it. Let's move to our next word. This word is weave. Let me work on a picture.
Now, weave is a verb, and it means to combine strands of thread or yarn in an alternating pattern in order to make cloth. I could say, the mother asked her daughter to help her weave pieces of yarn to make a square cloth. So what's our word for combining strands of thread or yarn in an alternating pattern? Great, weave. Let's check out Mrs. Ashlee's picture. Good job.
Our next word is a long word. Let's learn about it while Miss Tara works on a picture. The word is apprentice. Let's clap the syllables for apprentice. Say the word. Apprentice. How many syllables? 3 syllables. An apprentice is someone who works with a tradesperson to learn his or her job. For example, my aunt may have an apprentice to whom she teaches the skills they will need to build a house.
I'm so glad you brought up your aunt. I chose to draw her with an apprentice.
Great depiction of my aunt with her apprentice, Miss Tara. Can you share the next word with our scholars? I have my marker ready and I'm anxious to start drawing.
This one is going to be a great one to draw too. The word is churn. It's a noun, and a churn is a wooden container with a handle designed to stir milk into butter. Say the word. There you go, churn. Example, the girl couldn't wait to open the churn and taste the butter inside. Miss Ashlee, are you ready to add your picture of, what's the word, friends? That's it, churn.
Why, yes. Yes, I am. I remember my great-grandmother having a churn in her house when I was a little girl. That's what I was thinking about when I drew this picture.
Well, that's a great connection. Now, our final word is country. Say the word, scholars. Country. Miss Ashlee, share with us the meaning of country.
Country is an area of land with few buildings where homes are distant from one another, and most of the land is made up of farms. Here's an example of how we would use that word. The farmer and his family lived in the country.
My drawing goes nicely with your sentence, Miss Ashlee. Friends, let's go over our vocabulary words, okay? You say them after me. Trade, tradesperson, weave, apprentice, churn, and country.
Now that we have our vocabulary words down, let's dive right into our story. Remember to listen carefully to the read aloud so that you'll be able to name the chores that the children had to do long ago in colonial times if they lived on a farm. Today, we're going to take an imaginary trip back in time about 300 years ago to an early American farm. If you lived in the country long ago, you and your family did most of the work necessary for survival right at home. Now, the country is an area of land with few buildings and several farms. Country also means a nation, like the United States. In the country, Houses were far apart from one another, so you couldn't rely on neighbors or stores to get everything you needed. You had to make most things at home. Everything you needed, food to eat, water to drink or use for cooking and cleaning, lighting to help you see after dark, heat when it turned cold, and clothing required a lot of work by the family.
Even young children had to help out because there was so much work to do. There was no electricity for lamps or lights, and there were no flashlights. The only way to see anything after it got dark was to light candles that you made at home. There were no electric ovens or stoves, so you had to build a fire to heat your home and cook your meals. There were no sinks or faucets with running water inside the house like we have today. So you had to fetch any water you needed for drinking, cooking, or cleaning from the nearby creek or the well outside. There were no malls with clothing stores, so you had to make your own clothes. There were no supermarkets, so you had to grow your own vegetables, milk your own cows, and make your own cheese. Imagine doing all of that work every day. At the start of a typical day in the country, the first thing a woman did was fetch wood to start the fire in the hearth or fireplace. The hearth was the most important place in the home. Most of the chores that are to be done is required of fire. And especially in the winter, everyone needed to stay close to the hearth because it provided the only heat in the house.
After building the fire, a country woman would most likely start her day by baking bread. Sometimes she would make her own flour by grinding corn kernels or wheat into a fine powder. Then she would mix this flour and water with yeast and let it rise for several hours. The dough would then be put into an iron pot with a tight lid and hung over the hearth to bake or cook. One task that had to be done twice a day, no matter what, was milking the cows. This task took a long time and was usually left for the children to do. Once the milk was collected, the milk that was not drunk was either made into cheese or butter. And boys and girls, I know this looks like popcorn, but it's cheese curds. Making cheese involved a slow process of boiling and cooling the milk to produce curds or clumps of soured milk that sort of looked like cottage cheese. Those curds were pressed into forms to make the cheese. To make butter, milk was left to sit until the fatty cream floated to the top. Then the cream was poured into a tall wooden container called a churn. In the time we live now, we usually use the word churn to mean mix. In early America, though, a child usually had to pump the handle of the butter churn, called the dasher, up and down for a long time until the fat in the cream separated into butter. The leftover liquid, called buttermilk, was used for cooking or drinking.
People in the country ate mostly vegetables and grains. They only ate meat if the men or nearby neighbors had butchered or killed for food one of their animals. Because there were no refrigerators, the meat had to be preserved so it would not spoil or go bad. This was done by hanging it in strips above the fire or in a separate shed like this one called a smokehouse. The smoke from the fire dried out the meat, which prevented spoiling. The fire kept the meat from going bad. Beef jerky is an example of dried out smoked meat. Other foods were preserved by covering them in salt, canning them, or storing them in a cool, dark cellar. Canning is sealing food tightly in jars so no air can get in. After all those chores were done, it was time for the sewing. In colonial times, women had to make their own thread and cloth before they could sew anything. Men and boys picked cotton from the fields or sheared or cut the wool off the sheep. And women cleaned and dyed or colored this cotton or wool. Then women made the cotton or wool into thread or yarn. After that, they would weave the yarn into cloth to be used for clothing. To weave means to join threads in an alternating pattern to make cloth. Girls were taught to sew and weave usually before the age of 10 so they could help make their own clothes. Because it was so much work to make clothes and so expensive to buy new clothes in town, much of the sewing work was patching or fixing old clothes that had become worn out and had holes or tears.
Because children were expected to help out with every one of these chores, they did not have a lot of time to play. The few toys they had, they usually made themselves. Sometimes girls made dolls like these out of parts of a corn plant, and sometimes boys carved small toys out of wood. Most boys worked the farm alongside their fathers, taking over the family farm when they became older. If the family lived near a large town, some boys only lived at home until they were 11 or 12 years old. Then they were expected to learn a trade. A trade is a special job that uses certain skills, knowledge, and tools.
Each boy would become an apprentice for several years, working with a master tradesperson in town to learn his job. A tradesperson is an expert in his or her job or trade, and is one who trains an apprentice. The country family in colonial times worked hard every day. Sometimes a trip into town was a welcome relief or a break from their daily task. In town, the family was able to trade or buy things they needed so they could save the time and effort it took to make them. In our next read aloud, you'll hear about what happened when a farmer took a trip to town.
What an interesting read aloud. Friends, thank you for listening so carefully.
We know you comprehended what you heard because you listened so well. So let's give your comprehension a check. I'll ask you some questions. Remember to answer in complete sentences and restate the question in your response. Okay, in colonial times, what kinds of chores did children who lived on a farm have to do? There you go. I heard some great responses like prepare food and make clothes.
Now, was the farm we heard about in the read aloud a farm that existed a long time ago or one that exists today? You knew it. A long time ago. How could you tell? They didn't have electricity or running water or machines. They made everything themselves.
All right. Was the farm we heard about today in town or in the country? Amazing. The farm we read about was in the country.
Name one way that the country was different from towns. There you go. Houses in the country were far apart, and they had animals, and they grew their own crops.
Long ago, there was no electricity. What did farmers use for light to see at night? Farmers used candles that they made.
Long ago, there were no grocery stores. Where did milk and eggs come from? If you said cows and chickens, you are spot on. But where did cheese and butter come from? People made them from milk.
Scholars, you are experts at those comprehension questions. Now, I want to play a little game with you. Before we start our game, I want you to think back on a word we heard in our read aloud. You heard, if you lived in the country long ago, you and your family did most of the work necessary for survival right at home.
Say the word country with me. Country. The country is an area of land with few buildings where homes are distant or far apart from one another, and most of the land is made up of farms. I love being out in the country at night. There isn't any traffic, so it's quiet, and there aren't many lights, so you can see the stars really well.
Tell us about one thing you might see in the country. Use the word country when you tell about it. Excellent ideas. I heard I might see trees in the country, and I heard I may find forest animals in the country. Great responses. Now, what's the word we've been talking about? There you go, country. Now, it's time for our game. We will be playing Oh Yeah, Oh No today. Here's how it works. I'm going to name some things. If the thing I describe is something you might see in the country, you're going to say, oh yeah, I might see that in the country. If the thing I describe is not something you might see in the country, you're going to say, oh no, I would probably not see that in the country. So let's give it a try. A cow. I hear you. Oh yeah, I might see that in the country.
How about a skyscraper? Oh no, I would probably not see a skyscraper in the country.
A barn? Oh yeah, I might see a barn in the country. Friends, you're doing great. Let's do another.
A field of wildflowers. Oh yeah, I might see a field of wildflowers in the country. What about a traffic jam of cars? Oh no, I would not see a traffic jam of cars in the country.
You are experts. Before we finish up this episode, I want us to think back through some of the things we've learned today.
We learned so much about life long ago. Let's take a few minutes to compare and contrast life long ago and life now. Take a look at this top hat graphic organizer behind us. We'll use the portion that says then to write down things that are only ways people lived in the past. We'll use the portion that says now to list out only ways we live now. But this bottom portion down here, we'll use it to list out ways of life that are similar now to the way that things were then. So the top portion will be our contrast. That means they're different. Our bottom portion will be our comparisons, ways of life that are similar both now and then.
You start thinking of ways of life that were different and ways that are similar. I'll start us off. I'm going to ask Ms. Ashlee to write candle under then, because people use candles for lights. She's going to write light bulb under now, because we now have electricity and can use light bulbs. Can you think of anything to add to our top hat?
I heard churn. Where would I put churn? Perfect. We'll write it under then. Oh, Miss Ashlee made a mistake. That's okay. I also heard houses. Where would houses go? We're going to add that to the bottom because we had houses then and now.
Amazing work, everyone. Comparing and contrasting life long ago to life today.
Wow, we had so much fun today learning about colonial America. Friends, I hope you've enjoyed learning about the country family and how they did things long ago.
We look forward to seeing you again soon as we continue to explore important happenings in the past. Thanks for doing your best today, scholars. Be sure to share something you learned today with someone in your home.
All rights and credits for today's lesson belong to Core Knowledge Language Arts. We would like to thank them for publicly sharing these valuable resources. The views and opinions expressed in this lesson are those of Core Knowledge and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the Mississippi Department of Education. Thank you for joining us today, boys and girls, and we will see you next time.